In a decisive move amid escalating trade tensions, the Canadian province of Ontario implemented a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States, specifically targeting the states of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. This measure, announced by Ontario Premier Doug Ford on March 10, 2025, is a direct response to U.S. President Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on Canadian imports. The surcharge translates to an additional cost of approximately $10 per megawatt-hour for electricity exported to the specified U.S. states. Ontario's government estimates that this levy will generate daily revenues ranging from $300,000 Canadian dollars to $400,000 Canadian dollars, approximately $208,000 US dollars to $277,000 US dollars. These funds are intended to support Ontario's workers, families, and businesses affected by the ongoing trade dispute. The surcharge impacts electricity exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York, collectively affecting approximately 1.5 million households and businesses. Premier Ford indicated that the surcharge could add around $100 per month to the bills of affected American consumers. However, it's important to note that the actual impact may vary, as these states import varying proportions of their electricity from Ontario. Premier Ford emphasized that this measure is a direct response to the U.S. administration's tariffs, which he described as detrimental to the U.S. economy by increasing costs for American families and businesses. He asserted that Ontario would stand firm and utilize every available tool to protect its interests. Ford also warned that if the United States escalates the situation, Ontario would not hesitate to cease electricity exports entirely. The Independent Electricity System Operator, IESO, of Ontario has been directed to implement the surcharge. Under this directive, any generator selling electricity to the U.S. is required to add the 25% surcharge to the cost of power. The IESO will collect the surcharge from market participants, ensuring that the additional costs are accounted for in the export transactions. Ontario's decision to impose this surcharge reflects the province's deep economic connections with the United States and its commitment to protecting its economic interests amid escalating trade tensions. This move adds a new dimension to the trade dispute, highlighting the potential for essential services, such as electricity, to become leverage points in international trade negotiations. Understanding the specifics of Ontario's surcharge policy provides a foundation for assessing its broader implications. The next critical aspect to explore is the potential impact of this surcharge on U.S. electricity prices and consumer costs, particularly in the affected states. This analysis will shed light on how the surcharge may influence energy markets, consumer expenses, and the overall economic landscape in these regions. Ontario's recent imposition of a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States has raised concerns about potential increases in electricity prices and consumer costs in the affected states of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. However, a closer examination reveals that the actual impact may be less significant than initially feared. In Michigan, the reliance on electricity imports from Ontario is minimal. According to the Michigan Public Service Commission, less than 0.5% of the state's electricity was sourced from Ontario in 2024. Major utility providers, such as DTE Energy and Consumers Energy, have confirmed that they do not purchase electricity from Canada, relying instead on domestic generation and long-term contracts. DTE Energy emphasized its self-sufficiency, stating that it generates the majority of the electricity required to serve its customers, with any additional purchases coming from U.S. sources. Consequently, the 25% surcharge is expected to have a negligible impact on electricity prices and consumer costs in Michigan. Similarly, Minnesota's dependence on Canadian electricity imports is limited. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, which manages the power grid across much of the Midwest, reported that in 2024, less than 1% of its total energy was supplied via Canadian imports, with less than half of that coming from Ontario. A spokesperson for Minnesota Power, the primary utility serving the region bordering Ontario, indicated that the company receives only a very small proportion of its power from the province and expects any impact on customers to be negligible. New York imports a slightly higher percentage of its electricity from Canada, with about 4.4% of its total electricity coming from Canadian sources in 2023. In response to the surcharge, Governor Kathy Hochul ordered a review to assess the potential effects on energy prices and supply reliability. While the surcharge could introduce some upward pressure on electricity prices, the relatively small proportion of imports from Ontario suggests that the overall impact on consumer costs may be limited. Beyond the direct financial impact, the surcharge introduces uncertainty into the energy markets of the affected states. Utilities and grid operators may need to reassess their sourcing strategies and consider alternative suppliers to mitigate potential risks associated with cross-border electricity imports. This situation underscores the interconnected nature of the North American power grid and the potential vulnerabilities arising from trade disputes. Understanding the limited direct impact of Ontario's 25% electricity surcharge on U.S. electricity prices and consumer costs provides context for exploring the motivations behind this policy decision. The next section will delve into Canada's reasoning for implementing the surcharge, examining the broader trade dynamics and strategic considerations that influenced this course of action. The Canadian province of Ontario's decision to impose a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States stems from a series of escalating trade tensions initiated by U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. This move is a strategic response aimed at countering the economic impact of these U.S. measures. The catalyst for Ontario's surcharge was President Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on Canadian imports, including a 25% duty on steel and aluminum. These tariffs were perceived as detrimental to Canada's economy, prompting Ontario to take reciprocal action. Premier Doug Ford articulated that the surcharge was a necessary measure to protect Ontario's economic interests and to signal opposition to the U.S. tariffs. Ontario's choice to target electricity exports is strategic, leveraging its role as a significant energy supplier to U.S. border states. By imposing the surcharge, Ontario aims to exert economic pressure on states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, thereby encouraging a reassessment of the U.S. tariffs. This approach underscores the interconnectedness of the North American energy market and highlights the potential consequences of trade disputes on essential services. Domestically, the surcharge serves to demonstrate the Ontario government's commitment to defending local industries and jobs affected by U.S. tariffs. By taking a firm stance, Premier Ford seeks to reassure constituents of the government's proactive efforts to mitigate the adverse effects of international trade policies on the provincial economy. Understanding Ontario's rationale for the surcharge provides context for analyzing the subsequent reactions from the U.S. government and businesses. The recent trade tensions between the United States and Canada, sparked by Ontario's 25% surcharge on electricity exports, elicited swift reactions from both the U.S. government and the business community. In retaliation to Ontario's surcharge, President Donald Trump announced an additional 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum imports, effectively doubling the existing tariffs to 50%. He criticized Canada as a tariff abuser and emphasized that these measures were necessary to protect American industries and workers. However, following discussions between Ontario Premier Doug Ford and United States Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Ontario agreed to suspend its electricity surcharge. In response, President Trump halted his plan to double the tariffs on Canadian metals. This de-escalation was seen as a positive step toward resolving the trade dispute. The business sector expressed concerns over the escalating tariffs, fearing increased costs and supply chain disruptions. Industries reliant on Canadian steel and aluminum were particularly apprehensive about the potential impact on manufacturing and construction sectors. However, the suspension of the planned tariff increases provided some relief to these industries. Officials in the affected states of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York closely monitored the situation. While the direct impact of Ontario's surcharge on these states' electricity supplies was limited, state leaders remained vigilant about potential indirect effects on energy markets and prices. The resolution between the federal governments of the U.S. and Canada was welcomed, as it alleviated immediate concerns over energy costs and supply stability. The reciprocal measures and subsequent negotiations between the U.S. and Canada highlight the complexities of international trade relations and their far-reaching implications. The swift imposition and subsequent suspension of the electricity surcharge by Ontario highlight the volatility inherent in trade disputes. These actions can lead to uncertainty in markets, affecting investor confidence and potentially disrupting long-standing supply chains. The initial surcharge was a direct response to U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods, illustrating how retaliatory measures can escalate tensions and impact sectors beyond the original scope of the dispute. Politically, such disputes can strain diplomatic relations, making collaborative efforts on other fronts more challenging. The rhetoric employed by leaders during these times can influence public perception and further entrench positions, complicating resolution efforts. For instance, President Trump's labeling of Canada as a tariff abuser and the subsequent threats of increased tariffs exemplify how language can escalate tensions. Looking ahead, several scenarios could unfold. 1. Negotiated resolutions. Both nations may seek to engage in diplomatic negotiations to address the underlying issues prompting tariffs and surcharges. Utilizing frameworks like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, could provide structured avenues for resolving disputes and preventing future escalations. 2. Prolonged trade tensions. If resolutions are not achieved, prolonged trade tensions could lead to more extensive tariffs and counter-tariffs, affecting a broader range of industries. This scenario could result in increased prices for consumers and disruptions in various sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, and energy. 3. Economic diversification. In response to ongoing uncertainties, businesses may seek to diversify their supply chains and reduce reliance on cross-border trade. Such shifts could have long-term implications for the economic integration that has characterized U.S.-Canada relations for decades. The recent developments between the United States and Canada serve as a reminder of the complexities inherent in international trade relationships. While immediate impacts may be contained, the potential for broader economic and political consequences necessitates careful navigation and a willingness to engage in constructive dialogue. Both nations stand to benefit from collaborative approaches that reinforce their long-standing partnership and promote mutual economic prosperity. If you found this analysis insightful, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content.